She thought the only thing her grandfather left her was a dusty repair shop on the edge of a dying town. But when Rowan Dorsey found a strange key buried beneath the shop floor, what she unlocked wasn't just old concrete and steel. It was a hidden tunnel, long forgotten, beneath the ruins of Glenmere Trust Bank. Inside that darkness sat something unimaginable. 2 armored trucks, sealed away since 1977, holding more than just wealth. What she discovered would unravel secrets, reopen wounds, and force her to choose between silence and legacy. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing this community stretch across the map. And if stories like this spark your curiosity, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's tale might just take you even deeper down a hidden path. The garage still smelled like motor oil and old pine dust, the scent her grandfather used to carry on his coat. Rowan Dorsey stood in the center of the cluttered shop, hands on her hips, eyes sweeping across 30 years of grime, stacked parts, and forgotten tools. She was 26, broke, and utterly alone in the world now. Glenmere, Georgia, wasn't the kind of town where second chances were handed out, but maybe, just maybe, she'd find hers between these cracked concrete walls. She had inherited the shop 2 weeks ago, after Grandpa Clyde passed away quietly in his sleep. Everyone had told her to sell it. The town didn't need another mechanic, and she didn't need more debt. But something about this place felt tethered to her bones. Maybe it was the memory of Clyde's laugh echoing through the rafters, or the stories he used to tell about hidden rooms and the safest vaults in town. She always thought he was half kidding. On the second morning of cleanup, she pried open the warped floor panel near his old workbench. Beneath it, packed in a small velvet pouch, was a single brass key, odd teeth, stamped with the words, "Sentry Tunnel, Level 3. She turned it over in her palm, confused. There was no basement. At least, not one she knew of. That night, after locking up, she sat on the hood of a long-dead Buick and held the key under the light. It was worn smooth, like it had passed through many hands. Her grandfather had once said, "If something's locked, Ro, there's usually a reason. But if you've got the key, maybe it's your turn to find out why." She barely slept. The next day, Rowan tore through the office. Behind old records and rusted manuals, she found a blueprint of the property. Something caught her breath. A faint line marked, "Access Corridor, Century Bank Security Tunnel." It led from the back of the garage into the bank's foundation next door. A building shuttered since 1983 and slowly collapsing into itself. Rowan grabbed a crowbar and flashlight. Behind the back wall, where old paint peeled like sunburned skin, she chipped away until hollow knocks echoed beneath each hit. A false panel. It crumbled under pressure, revealing a steel door hidden behind layers of drywall and time. The key fit perfectly. With a deep groan, the mechanism shifted, ancient gears clanking like bones in the dark. The door creaked open into a narrow hallway sloping downward, swallowed in shadows. The air rushed past her face like a breath held for too long. She hesitated, then stepped inside. Somewhere far below her boots, something waited. Not rust, not rot, but history, locked in steel and sealed by silence. The tunnel descended at a gentle but steady angle. The floor a checkerboard of cracked cement and rusted steel grates. Rowan's boots echoed with each step, the sound swallowed quickly by the thick, damp air. The flashlight beam cut only a few feet ahead, revealing walls coated in dust and the kind of industrial filth that only comes from decades of abandonment. She was maybe 50 feet in when the door behind her creaked shut. It didn't latch, but the sound made her stop and exhale slowly. She wasn't scared, not yet, but she wasn't relaxed either. It felt like walking into the past. She followed the path until it curved gently left. A faded sign hung from the ceiling, barely legible. "Century Bank Secure Access Level 3. The same words stamped on the key. Her breath caught. This was real. Not just some sealed utility corridor or storm drain, but something more deliberate, more important. She kept moving. Ahead, the beam of her flashlight struck something metallic. A square doorway with heavy double doors, their hinges thick as her wrist. One side hung slightly ajar. She stepped closer, shining her light over the lettering, stenciled in black across the steel. Authorized vehicles. Only property of Glenner Trust Security Division. Vehicles? She whispered. That didn't make sense. The tunnel had been barely wide enough to feel safe on foot, but now it opened into a larger chamber. She pushed the door with her shoulder. It groaned open just enough for her to slip through sideways. The flashlight shook in her hand, a combination of nerves and disbelief. The chamber beyond was massive, a reinforced garage of sorts. Steel beams stretched across the ceiling, concrete support columns ran along the sides, and in the center sat a single armored truck. It was boxy and faded gray, the type she'd only ever seen in old movies. Its tires were deflated, but intact. Dust coated the entire vehicle, like ash. The company logo was almost worn away. Glenmere Vault Services. Rowan approached cautiously, heart pounding. She swept her light along the side, then stepped around to the rear. There was a number plate bolted and dated 1976. A padlock hung from the back handles, but it was rusted to near crumbling. She pressed her thumb against the cold metal, then pulled out a wrench from her bag. One hard twist snapped it in two. The doors creaked open. Inside, metal crates stacked neatly like a miniature fortress. Some bore seals, others were open, their contents gone or never filled. A clipboard still hung from a hook near the entrance, its paper yellowed and brittle. She reached for it and read, "Inventory incomplete. Awaiting final transfer authorization." Dated the 2nd of August, 1977, just days before the heist, her grandfather used to mention. She turned, and her flashlight flickered once, twice, then held steady again. A noise behind her made her flinch, just water dripping from a pipe. But something else tugged at her now. Deeper than feared was history, raw and unspoken. Something had happened here, something no one had come back to see. Until now. Rowan stood still for a long moment, letting the silence settle around her like a blanket. The chamber's heavy air clung to her skin, metallic and damp, tasting faintly of oil and mildew. She stepped backward out of the armored truck, her boots crunching softly on the dust-layered concrete. The crates inside still haunted her, not because of what they held, but because of what they didn't. No money, no gold, just remnants. A promise interrupted. She turned her flashlight toward the far end of the garage, where the tunnel seemed to branch again. There was another passageway, narrower, sloping even deeper underground. But something else caught her eye first. A wall of doors, vault doors, 5 in total, each recessed into thick cement frames and lined in steel. Numbers were stenciled above them, some clearer than others. One was slightly ajar, just like the truck. Rowan approached it slowly. The steel was cold and dented, the handle stiff when she turned it. The vault inside was empty. Mostly. A few wooden crates leaned against the wall, one broken open, showing nothing but shredded packing material inside. She knelt to inspect it, and noticed something odd. A piece of old police tape, yellowed and faded, stuck to the inside of the crate. It wasn't official. It looked hurried, almost like someone trying to ward people off without drawing attention. "What were you hiding?" she murmured, almost to herself. In another vault, she found rows of steel shelving. Some shelves held boxes labeled with serial numbers and transaction codes, old banking documents, withdrawal forms, transfers, handwritten notes, the kind of thing that should have been shredded decades ago. It was like the bank's backroom had simply gone to sleep and never woken up. But this wasn't just forgotten paperwork. Some of the forms had red stamps, confidential, internal audit only. Others were marked, do not process. Rowan snapped photos on her phone. She didn't know what any of it meant yet, but it felt bigger than just abandoned trucks. She moved deeper into the next vault, this one locked, but with the same kind of rusted padlock as before. She used her wrench again. It gave way easily. Inside was another armored vehicle, This one smaller, almost like a courier van, and unlike the first, it had clearly never been touched. Its tires still held air. The driver's door was sealed with a strip of tape that read, "Sealed Federal Hold." Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the tape. She didn't break it, not yet. Her heart was thudding too hard. She backed away slowly and looked around the vault again. Someone had tried to erase this place, but hadn't finished the job. She could feel it, like the last page of a story that never made it to the press. She returned to the first truck, opened the driver's door, and checked the glove box. Inside was a faded map of downtown Glenmere, marked with thick red lines, tunnel routes. One circled a location labeled Transfer Terminal, Safe House East. It was just across the river. She sat there in the truck for a long time, engine silent, air thick, her thoughts racing. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was a plan left unfinished, and someone never came back to finish it. By the time Rowan emerged from the tunnel, the sun had dipped below the hills, casting Glenmere in that bruised blue twilight that made everything look like memory. Her clothes were dust-streaked, her boots caked in mud from the deeper vaults, and her mind buzzed with questions she couldn't yet name. She locked up the garage, shoved the key into her back pocket, and climbed the stairs to the small apartment above the shop where her grandfather used to sleep. The old recliner still sat by the window. She sank into it without turning the light on. Instead, she pulled out the photos she'd taken inside the tunnel, close-ups of crate stamps, the old audit forms, that sealed van tucked inside the secondary vault. And that map? She couldn't stop staring at it. The route clearly led away from the bank into the forest on the east side of town, toward the river bend where the Glenmere train depot used to operate before it burned down in 1981. The more she read, the more she realized the heist her grandfather once half-joked about wasn't a myth. It had happened. But the story told around Glenmere didn't line up. According to town lore, 2 guards had gone rogue during a major fund transfer and vanished with millions in untraceable cash. The official story said they were likely killed, their bodies dumped in the Chattaway River, but no evidence was ever found. Just closed caskets, sealed records, and a few photos in dusty newspaper archives. Rowan searched online archives, poring over microfilm scans of the Glenmere Daily Gazette, the only paper that covered the bank at the time. A headline from the 5th of August 1977 jumped out. Glenmere Trust Robbery. Suspects vanish without a trace, no leads after 48 hours. The article named the 2 guards, Ellis Roque and Luther Brandt, both men in their early 30s. Decorated veterans, family men, trusted employees of the bank's private security division. The report described them as unlikely suspects who were not known to have any financial problems. Rowan's gut twisted. This wasn't a simple theft. Someone had rewritten the ending. She clicked through to later articles. By the end of that year, Glenmere Trust had quietly dissolved, absorbed by a larger firm that scrubbed all mention of the robbery. The building was condemned a few years later, after a small fire damaged the upper offices, a suspicious, uninvestigated fire as it turned out. The whole event had been papered over, erased, but Rowan knew better now. She'd seen the sealed vaults, the armored trucks, the crates that had never reached their destination. She ran a search on Ellis Roque. Only one hit a probate court document from 2002, unclaimed property. No next of kin listed. It was sparse, almost deliberately so. But there was an address, 410 Copper Ridge Lane, Glenmere outskirts. She marked it down. And then, she searched the second name. Luther Brandt brought up more. A wife, a child, a church memorial. But one line stood out. Survived by younger brother, Thomas Brandt. She read it twice. The name was familiar. That was the man who had shown up at her shop 2 days ago. The one who asked if her garage used to belong to Clyde Dorsey. The one who said he was just passing through. He wasn't. He was looking for something. And now she knew what. The next morning, Rowan didn't even make coffee. She was back in the tunnel before sunrise. Flashlight in one hand, crowbar in the other. The silence this time wasn't eerie. It was electric. She moved with purpose now, retracing her steps through the vault corridor and straight to the second armored truck, the sealed one. She stared at the strip of federal tape for a long moment before carefully peeling it away. It didn't resist. The adhesive had long since given up the fight. Inside, the cab was dark but intact. The leather seat cracked like dry skin, and a single key still hung in the ignition. She turned it out of habit. No response, just a soft mechanical click. Then she noticed it. A hatch beneath the passenger seat. Almost invisible unless you knew where to look. Rowan knelt, slipped the crowbar into the edge of the hatch, and popped it open. It wasn't locked, just wedged in place by years of dust and disuse. Inside, a metal strongbox, unmarked but solid, like something made to survive a fall from a plane. She hauled it out, set it on the floor, and pried it open. It wasn't gold. It was paper-rolled documents, laminated tags, and a bundle of cash count certificates. On top of them all sat a thin plastic binder, wrapped in a cloth stamped with a security company's logo, Glenmere Vault Services. She opened it and froze. Serial numbers, dozens of them, typed out line by line, with itemized values beside each. Bearer bonds, gold reserves, restricted currency bundles, but they weren't just inventory lists. Each page was labeled with a location and transfer time, and the final sheet bore a handwritten note: delivery suspended, emergency reroute ordered. L.B. Luther Brandt. Rowan's breath hitched. These weren't robbers' notes. They were records. Records of an emergency plan, one that had never made it to daylight. She scanned the rest of the contents. Stamped bank clearances, government transfer receipts, and a personal effects envelope addressed to Ellis Roque. Inside was a photo of two men, smiling, standing in front of the same truck she was now sitting in. They didn't look like criminals. They looked like brothers. She flipped the photo over. In fading ink, it read, "We make the drop, then we're done. No more secrets, L.B." Rowan stared at the words. They weren't planning a heist. They were trying to protect something, or someone. But from who? Back in the truck's cargo hold, she forced open a side panel near the floor. It revealed a recessed compartment, and within it, 3 metal boxes, bolted into the floor with heavy-grade locks. This time, they weren't empty. She pried open the first. Inside, gold bars. Real ones. Unmarked, untraceable, dense and glowing faintly in the narrow beam of her flashlight. Rowan sat back on her heels, blinking hard. The weight of it all pressed down on her. She wasn't just standing in a vault. She was standing inside a truth that had been buried for nearly 50 years. Someone had tried to erase this story, but the steel remembered. And now, so did she. The knock on the garage door came just past noon. Rowan had been sitting at the workbench, flipping through the documents she'd retrieved from the strongbox, her brain so tangled in serial numbers and banking codes that the sound made her flinch. She wiped her hands on her jeans and walked to the front, half expecting a parts delivery. But it wasn't FedEx. It was him. Same worn boots, same tan overcoat that hung past his knees, a navy ball cap pulled low over steel gray eyes. The man who'd come by the shop 3 days ago asking about her grandfather. The man who didn't leave a name. Rowan opened the door halfway. "You've got 10 seconds to tell me who you are," she said, arms crossed. "And why you've been sniffing around my property." The man nodded slowly, as if expecting this. "Name's Thomas Brandt," he said evenly. "My brother was Luther." Rowan stared at him. "I think you already found his truck." Her throat went dry. "You knew about the tunnel?" "Not exactly," he said. "I knew they built something. My brother and Ellis, they weren't stupid. They knew someone was watching them. Back in '77, the bank was laundering money for things no small-town bank should have had its hands on. Government contracts, arms shipments, dirty stuff. My brother, he found out. He and Ellis tried to move the real money off-site before it disappeared into the system forever. And then they disappeared instead," Rowan said. He nodded once. "That's the part that haunts me." She stepped aside, reluctantly letting him in. The garage smelled like brake cleaner and fresh dust from the night before. Thomas took a slow walk past the lifted El Camino she'd been working on, eyes scanning the walls like they held memories. "I went looking for them for years," he said softly, "until people stopped answering my calls. The company shut down. The police had their story. Nobody wanted a different one." Rowan reached under the workbench and pulled out the photograph from the glove box, the one of Luther and Ellis in front of the truck. Thomas stared at it for a long moment. "I took this," he murmured, 3 days before they left. His hand trembled slightly as he set it down. "I found crates," Rowan said. "Gold bars, documents, records of emergency reroutes. One page had your brother's initials." Thomas sank into the creaky stool beside the bench. He always said if anything happened, the truth would survive in steel. Rowan looked at him. "Why come to me? Why now?" "Because your grandfather used to work for the bank too," he said. "Security maintenance. He helped them design the tunnel systems. I always thought, maybe he knew more than he let on." Rowan swallowed hard. She hadn't known that. Not really. Clyde Dorsey had always kept his past tucked away behind a crooked smile and an oil-stained hat. But it made sense now. The key. The maps. The quiet way he'd avoided questions about the bank. "I don't want the gold," Thomas said. "I don't want revenge. I want to know what happened to my brother. That's it." Rowan nodded slowly. "Then, let's find out together." In the corner, the photo sat beneath the soft buzz of the overhead light, its edges curling upward with age. Two men smiled back from a time when doing the right thing meant risking everything, and their story was no longer buried. Rowan had never considered herself sentimental. Grease, gears, and grit, that was her rhythm. But now, with a tunnel beneath her feet, and the ghost of her grandfather echoing in every corner of the garage, she couldn't shake the sense that she was living inside someone else's unfinished story. One written in steel, sealed in vaults, and waiting to be reopened. She and Thomas stood together in the back room that night, maps spread across the workbench. The lines were faded, but one route still called to them both a stretch that led out from the deepest part of the tunnel, marked only Safe House East. "I thought it was just a nickname," Thomas said. "But if they marked it, if it was mapped, it's real," Rowan said. "And I think it's still out there." They packed flashlights, gloves, and a thermos of lukewarm coffee, then returned to the tunnel entrance. The deeper vault corridor, where the air was dampest and the smell of rust strongest, held a secondary path she hadn't explored, one blocked by an old steel gate. This time, Rowan brought a battery-powered angle grinder. Sparks flew as metal screamed in protest. After 20 minutes and 3 broken cut-off wheels, the gate finally buckled open. Beyond it lay a passage untouched by time. The walls narrowed, ceiling lower now. Pipes ran overhead, some still wet to the touch. And then the floor dipped. Mud clung to their boots. Rowan's flashlight caught the shimmer of something on the ground. Broken glass, scattered bolts, and a length of rotted rope. Whatever had been here, someone left in a hurry. They followed the corridor until it widened again, and there it was. The second armored truck. Unlike the first two, this one had clearly been stored for longer. The dust was thicker, the air even heavier. But its tires were inflated, its frame intact. Its paint bore the same faded crest. Glenmere Vault Services. Rowan approached slowly. The rear doors were closed, but not locked. She looked at Thomas. "Ready?" He nodded. She opened them. Gold. Stacks of it. Not loose, but sealed in clear crates marked for international transfer. Beneath them, a row of slim briefcases, leather-bound, combination-locked, sat perfectly aligned. Thomas reached in and lifted one out, setting it carefully on the ground. His fingers trembled as he turned the latches. The lock clicked open. Inside, a cassette tape. Just one. Labeled, Confession, the 6th of August, 2077, LB. Rowan stared at it, heart thudding. "Your brother recorded this?" Thomas nodded, His voice caught in his throat. He must have known they were running out of time. Back at the garage, she rummaged through storage and found an old tape deck her grandfather had rigged up for AM radio. With shaking hands, she inserted the cassette. A soft hiss filled the air. Then a voice. "This is Luther Brandt. If you're hearing this, we didn't make it." He paused, took a long breath, and then began to tell a story that would change everything. The tape hissed. Then Luther Brandt's voice returned calm, steady, heartbreakingly human. "I don't know who's listening to this. Maybe no one. Maybe my brother. Maybe the feds, years too late. But I need this to exist somewhere." Rowan and Thomas sat in silence as the words poured out, the shop filled only by the sound of a man trying to make sense of his own undoing. "We found out Glenmere Trust wasn't just a bank," Luther said. "It was a funnel. CIA black budgets, offshore weapons funds, quiet bribes buried under fabricated accounts. Ellis and we didn't want to be heroes. We just didn't want to be part of it anymore." Rowan felt Thomas's hands tighten into fists. "We had a plan. Move the real assets into cold storage. Build a trail. Wait for the right journalist or official to blow it open. But someone found out. I don't know who. All I know is, the night before the transfer, we got a call from a blocked number. The voice told us we'd disappear if we went through with it." Ellis laughed. "I didn't." There was a pause in the recording. A breath held too long. They were right. Ellis is gone. I don't know if he ran or if they got him first. I stayed hidden, long enough to finish the truck route and bury the vaults. The second one, the one with the real gold, I sealed myself. I kept the keys separate. I prayed that someday someone honest would find it. If you're hearing this, maybe that prayer landed. The tape clicked softly, then ejected. Rowan leaned back, eyes still fixed on the player. Thomas wiped his face quietly, staring at the floor. "Ellis didn't run," Rowan finally said. "He wouldn't have left all that behind." Thomas nodded, but his voice cracked. "I know." They returned to the tunnel 2 hours later, flashlight beams slicing through damp air. The second armored truck was just as they'd left it sealed, ghost-like, waiting. Rowan moved to the cargo hold. With both trucks now uncovered, her understanding deepened. The first had been a decoy. Documents, empty crates, enough to mimic a real transfer. But the second, this one had been packed with the true assets. Gold bars, sealed financial instruments, even diplomatic pouches stamped with foreign embassies. She opened one crate with a pry bar and found bearer bonds, hundreds of them, still pristine. Value, tens of millions, maybe more. Another case held engraved certificates tied to Cold War-era infrastructure deals in South America. Every artifact screamed one thing. This was never meant to be found. A final locker built into the floor resisted her first 3 attempts to crack it. Then, finally, the latch gave. Inside was a locked satchel. Rowan ripped it open. Passports. 3 of them. One was Ellis Roke's. The other 2? Fakes. One with Luther's face and a new name. The other was blank. A clean slate. An escape plan. Thomas stared at them. They were going to run, after all. No, Rowan said quietly, shaking her head. They were going to start over. But something went wrong. And now, nearly 5 decades later, she was the one left holding the weight of a decision they never got to finish. The gold sat beneath the tarps like sleeping giants, unmoving and undeniable. Rowan stood at the edge of the truck's open doors, the cold vault air brushing against her neck. Thomas was pacing behind her, silent for a long time. The tape, the bonds, the gold, the forged identities, it all spelled out. The same question that had loomed since she found that key. What now? I can help you move it, Thomas said finally. No one knows it's here. You wouldn't have to go public. We split it down the middle. Quiet. Clean. Rowan didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the floor of the truck, where Luther Brandt's words still echoed in her mind. If you're hearing this, maybe that prayer landed. I didn't find this just to get rich. she said, almost to herself. I found it because someone buried the truth, and it clawed its way back through steel and time and fate to be seen. Oh, Thomas stopped walking. You think turning it over will make anything right? No, she said, but pretending it never happened won't either. They sat at the workbench again, surrounded by documents, maps, crates, a crime scene, a confession, and a second chance all tangled into one. Rowan pulled out a blank notepad and began writing. Not calculations, not a list of assets, but a timeline, a record. I want to tell the real story, she said. Ellis, Luther, the bank, what they tried to stop. Thomas exhaled, long and slow. You'll lose the gold, she nodded. Probably. You'll get heat. From the feds, from people who buried this. Most likely. He paused, then nodded with something like admiration in his eyes. Then do it right. The next day, she contacted a friend of a friend, a retired investigative journalist, who once tried to blow the whistle on Glenmere Trust before being pushed out of his paper. She sent him copies of the tape, the bank records, and photos of the gold, but not their location. Not yet. He called her twice. The first time, he didn't say anything, just breathed. The second, his voice shook when he said, This could rewrite a whole chapter of Cold War financial history. I'm not doing it for history, Rowan replied. I'm doing it for closure. 2 days later, Rowan walked alone down the tunnel for what might be the last time. The truck still sat in silence, as if waiting for instructions. She knelt beside it, opened the final storage crate, and placed the photo of Ellis and Luther inside. Then, carefully, she locked it again. A week after that, the story broke. Cold case uncovered. Hidden tunnel reveals. Secrets of 1,977 banking conspiracy. It went viral in hours. Federal agents arrived in Glenmere within the day. Rowan led them into the tunnel herself. She stood by as they documented everything. She answered every question. She handed over the gold, the bonds, the passports, but not the letter, not the cassette, not the memory. Those belonged to her now. It took weeks for the chaos to settle. Federal agents combed every inch of the tunnel. Journalists camped outside her shop. Strangers left notes on the door. Some offered praise, others suspicion. But through it all, Rowan Dorsey never flinched. She had told the truth, the whole truth. And when the dust finally cleared, what remained wasn't just a story, it was a shift. The Department of Justice issued a quiet statement weeks later. Significant historical financial materials recovered from a previously unknown tunnel system in Glenmere, Georgia. Investigation ongoing. It was vague, clinical, carefully worded. But behind closed doors, it triggered something seismic. A reopening of files, audits on long-defunct institutions, interviews with surviving bank employees. A ripple began, where a wave had once been buried. Rowan didn't follow all of it. She didn't need to. For her, the legacy was never in the lawsuits or the headlines. It was in the face of Thomas Brandt when she handed him the final cassette. For you, she'd said, to keep or to pass on, he cried then, quietly. Gratefully, the town of Glenmere changed too. Not overnight, but slowly. The old bank was officially condemned and marked for preservation. Not for glory, Rowan said during the town hall meeting, but for memory. Let's not let another truth get buried in cement. Her garage, once fading into disrepair, became something more than a shop. People stopped by, not just for oil changes, but for conversation. Students came in groups, asking about the vault, about the men who vanished, about how someone like her, a young woman with grease under her nails, could uncover something lost for nearly half a century. She started a small program, just like her grandfather might have called Legacy Built, teaching teens how to rebuild not just engines, but trust in themselves. Every machine has a hidden system, she told them. But the important thing is knowing when to follow the schematics and when to write your own. One spring morning, she received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside, a small wooden box, stained dark, polished, smooth. She opened it gently. Inside sat the original brass key, stamped Sentry Tunnel Level 3, resting on a red cloth. No note, no instructions, just the key. Rowan smiled and held it in her palm. She knew what it meant. The tunnel no longer needed hiding. Its purpose had been fulfilled. But the key, the symbol of entry, of curiosity, of courage, belonged to her now, in every sense that mattered. That evening, she walked the length of the tunnel one last time. Not to open anything. Not to uncover secrets. Just to remember. She paused in front of the second truck, now an empty shell. She placed her hand on the side panel and whispered, "We did it." Then she turned out the light and walked away, not with gold in her pockets, but with something far rarer. A story made whole, a truth, unburied, a legacy, finally given the light it always deserved.